we're going to start with a panel that it's called Unveiling the Buyer's Perspective. So we have the buyers now here, obviously. I will let them introduce themselves, but please welcome the moderator, Javier Roces from Carolina Herrera.
Hi, hello. Good afternoon or morning or midday, depending on where you are from. No? So it's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about sync, and we have a panel of very special guests that each one of them brings their own perspective. I'm Javier Roces. I'm actually, despite being the moderator for the panel, kind of like playing the role of the client. So I have a very biased view on the whole thing, or a very not biased, like a very partial view of the whole thing. And then I think it's interesting if all of them, they introduce themselves. We have people from labels, and then from clients as well, LV. So, if you want to introduce yourselves, who you are, what do you do? So I don't want to miss anyone's curricular background, saying someone was an artist or like an A&R and they were an artist and A&R. So I think it's better if you introduce yourself. So.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was an artist. That's how I got into the industry. Signed to EMI back in 2005. But now I look after sync for Warner Music Group. And my remit pretty much covers international sync. So it's everywhere except the USA. So that's me.
Vincent?
Hi, nice to meet you. So my name is Vincent, and I'm the head of music supervision at Louis Vuitton in Paris. Most of my work is sync placement for all the content we produced. We do a lot of content, from the fashion shows, the campaigns, the small digital activation. There's a lot going on. And I also do some booking for events and curation for other type of scenographic pieces. And that's pretty much it.
And then you have Katie.
I'm Katie Ginsberg. Yeah. I'm at Partisan Records, and I also rep sync for Knitting Factory Records, which is the whole Fela Kuti catalog, as well as DFA, and then a small publishing company called Left Music. And I do global, worldwide, all media across everything. So yeah, excited to be here.
Well, thanks, for the intro. The way the panel is structured is we're going to have 4 sections. The first section, we're going to be talking about something that, at least for me, after being in the industry for 20 years, is kind of like a mystery, which is how a specific song or piece of music ends up somewhere. Because, and then what does that mean? Then the second part is about the whole thing related to negotiations. The third part, we're going to be talking about pricing, and, I think it'll be interesting to look at the future of how the whole process can be improved. And, we're going to do, the intro, and probably this is a question more for Vincent, who is more on the client side. Today video kind of rules the world, no? And there's this huge association between image and sound where you're trying to produce a strong video. And I always say that people who work in brands or in video games or whatever work in the industry of entertainment. No, it's our role to entertain people, and we have moved from a moment of still images where video has taken a ton of relevance. But while there is a very precise process on how you select people when you're casting someone, when you're casting a face. Sometimes like a model or actress, their stats, their social media performance, their latest works, with whom they have worked, what's their upcoming. So there's a very rational process, and we are looking for directors or photographers. There's a very rational process. At least for me, and maybe even Vincent, can bring some light into this. The whole music thing of why a song or a piece of music ends up in a mood that then ends up being the campaign, and then keeps on becoming part of the brand identity for 40 years. It's still a very random thing that suddenly someone decided to put that there and ended up there. So I think, how does, that whole thing happen, or how do you, think about it from, at the end, it's like a brand strategy point of view. How do you choose, is it the audience, the genre, what things, people take into consideration to make that magic mix?
I don't think you were talking about the rationale behind the selection of maybe a model or a photographer. I don't think there's so much of a rationality behind it, and especially in music, there is, of course, a structure, ideas, and reference that are also relevant, whether it's a band, a single artist, or an actor, that you can look into before making a decision. But I would say that first of all, it's not something like it's not a divine opening that you may have and be like, this is the song. It's always a process. It's, I mean, on my end, it's always something collective. I'm not choosing on my own without anyone with me, except maybe for a very tiny project. Usually it's a discussion, and it goes from, it really, you were talking about how do you choose? Do you choose with your final audience? I say, yeah, of course, you're not maybe going to push the same music depending on your audience, but I would have to say first, it's also the internal audience that's important, the preliminary people you're going to be talking to. That's who you're talking to. For example, for a project, I might be getting in touch with a director or an art director, and they will have their own vision, and their brief might not be exactly the same, and my role will be try to merge all those different opinions, and from there you'll get kind of the brand identity, which is, in my case, very broad. Louis Vuitton does so many things. We don't have a musical identity per se. We have lots of faces. And from there, you select and you reduce, you narrow down. But it's never, we never define in advance something very specific or rational. It's never like, we need this from that era, that genre of music, that BPM, and go down that way. And even when we did, we usually change our mind halfway. So it's an ongoing process.
So is the process more like, what you're saying is like more like a canvassing at the beginning, so you like open the scope of what you're looking for, and then you select down the funnel your choices, rather than, okay, I want this precise thing. No, it seems like, at least, when you say, it seems like the whole selection of what makes the fit, you do like a wider research. And how do you approach that? Do you approach that on your own? You work with some people who help you do that? Because that's kind of like...
So yes, it's a narrowing down process overall. In the end, once in a while we have one very specific song in mind in advance. Usually it doesn't work out that way, but that would be great for me. That would be easier if I had like this one thing. But I don't think it's a really good idea either. I think working the project helps you have the mood emerge by itself in a way. And about your second question, yes, I have it with a team of 3 people, and I have one creative with me now, and one people that is more into the admin part. So it's a discussion, but overall it's a discussion really with the talents that are involved in the campaign that have their word on the music, and from there it's up to us to really grab idea here and there, submit everything, maybe change everything and start back from scratch. It depends.
So then I think it's interesting what you mentioned, like there are brands or houses or entities that have a very wide musical identity, therefore they can play with a wide canvas, and then there are other houses that have a very precise, musical identity.
We are from the first group.
Yeah,
it's funny because a lot of things that would make my life a little bit easier if I was working at Saint Laurent, for example. They have a very strong musical identity, but at the end of the day, I'm happy that we're not just like narrow-minded into something specific. It helps being creative, I guess.
Yeah. And then it's still like, creating impact and music, another Louis Vuitton brand, Celine, with the Symphonie Fantastique, and their last video is how someone who is probably associated with a rock identity by bringing in a piece of classical music, and then they're like creating this disruption and getting great impact on I think it's a testimony of how powerful music and image together create this thing that sticks in the mind of people, no? And
but that's the beauty of it. Even if you have a frame, a strong frame, you can break it entirely, and that's what makes it also very interesting. Yeah, by the way, I'm not very entirely familiar with all the LVMH brands.
Sure. No, just I'm talking more from the consumer point of view rather than from the industry side. And then another thing that I think is interesting, I don't know if you've lived this situation, is that you work with something, and I think it's interesting to take to the second part, which is okay, this is the creative process, you choose things and how influence these things, and which is the part related to negotiations, okay, how to unblock things and how to make things happen, and maybe something for all of you, for Tim or for Katie, because I've lived, there's a mood, okay, and everyone loves this, and you have presented this to someone, okay, imagine like this is the big campaign, and everyone loves this song, and suddenly the thing doesn't move, the artist doesn't want, or and this has happened. It has sometimes, because the music feels part of such a strong identity of what you're selling, and people say like, okay, we want to do this, and we don't really want to move away because they have been sold that idea, and it's impossible to move them away. So then there's the part of the negotiation that, at least from the client, maybe because in your case you have a specific theme, it's always like a very obscure or unknown or lack of, we don't know how to approach it. Like, from the label side, any advice or how to approach this? Because sometimes you have something that you put there and it becomes part of what you want to be for the future. People love it, and then you put other music and they say, nah, it's not the same. Literally, it's like you put this and it's like, no, I like the other one much better. I mean, this is awful. This happens so many times. This is like, and I see Fred here in the front row, and this happens so many times, so many back and forth. How to approach this? How to unblock? I mean, any tips on?
I think
this anxiety.
Something that and it is anxiety for everyone involved. I think one of the things that perhaps we didn't touch upon on that first question, though, is that we always think anyway that we're often dealing with emotion. So we try and make it become tangible with numbers or stats or like impressions, but ultimately our artists deal in emotion. And when you deal in emotion, it comes to a point in a negotiation, to your second point, where it can get very difficult, because the reason why everyone has fallen in love is because they are emotionally attached to something. And it's bizarre because there aren't many industries, well, I don't think so, where the buyers and the sellers can become so emotionally involved in the process. And obviously our job is to kind of be objective and work between those lines and tell the stories of why it's a great thing to do. But I think the bottom line from a Warner Music perspective is we're so keen to have our music used in so many different places. So we're just honoured when Vincent picks up the phone or Fred picks up the phone. But yeah, it can be difficult, right?
I feel the exact same way. Like, I mean, ultimately, at my label, artists have final approval over everything, as they should. And there's often times where there's a brand that maybe they don't want to be aligned with. Maybe they don't eat meat, so they don't want to be in a McDonald's ad, or they're sober, so they don't want to be in an alcohol ad. So I think it's very specific per artist. So it's always a different conversation, honestly. And I think that's why sometimes we'll be like, it comes down to money, but oftentimes it maybe is brand alignment and not just the financials, going back to kind of how the emotions tie into everything. But that's why I think it's always a conversation. I think that's why it is a negotiation, because it's never can just be like, here's 10K, we'll say yes. It's always a back and forth. So yeah.
And then, one thing that happens, and because you are talking this emotional part, and I think, one thing that music is super emotional for everyone. Sometimes when you show something, a piece or a creative thing, people don't react from their brain, not even their heart. Sometimes they react from their stomach. It's like really, it's so primitive why people get moved by music, no? And then there's the whole thing with the negotiation that I've lived, that sometimes people get very frustrated, like you do a thing, and then halfway through you try to change the scope, like more territories, more use, and then back on the table. Any tips or any advice, like, hey, this is like the good manual of how to approach a negotiation, like based on your experience?
Well, first of all, we can't get emotional about it, right? We can't. It's not. We would not be doing a good job if we do. And things change, and people's needs change, and artists' needs change. So we've become very good diplomats, I think.
Okay.
Yes, it would be fantastic if when you're buying a piece of music, every piece of information was present at that point of us telling the client how much the song would be. But we have to be understanding that we want to be giving off an impression that we want this stuff to happen. And I think the great thing about working for a music label is we have lots of artists. So if there is an artist who doesn't want to do a campaign, we have to respect that to a degree. We shouldn't be insisting an artist do a campaign, but there's plenty of other artists that do want to do a campaign. So for us, it's about being as close to Louis Vuitton and yourself and Fred and all the buyers to make sure we're educated. Well, this artist is passionate about this. This artist, to your point, cares about these values. So if you want to approach them, we need to tell that story about why those values are important to you as well. But yeah, for us, it's about being measured, I think, as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we also want to maintain the song's value, and I think that's something that we're really hyper aware of, especially in this day and age when it's like some people are licensing for $500, and it's I think that's one of the parts of the label where we're like, okay, like what is this worth? You're literally putting a monetary value on a song, and I think that's a really hard thing to do. So I think that's, I think it's really hard. I don't think there's like a straightforward way of doing it necessarily.
And when you were talking about that example of people, a client falling in love with one option that ends up not being available, I do have that all the time. But I think everybody from the label perspective, the middleman or the client internally, everyone needs to be cautious because we're talking about human and their deepest expression. So basically you shouldn't push option music like they're granted, and be always very careful about what you do until the deal is done. And that's how I survive along those years, making sure not sending over ideas that are not doable, because it will create frustration. So that takes a little bit more time, but in the end you might save a little bit of energy. Because you're right, if some top management, whatever, fell in love with a track, it's going to be very difficult to sell them something else for obvious reason. So yes, the negotiation starts there also by being very mellow and careful about how you present things and the ideas behind it.
So you kind of like do like a pre-test of that what you're going to be presenting is a viable option, not 100% viable, but in this you cannot. You recommend doing like a pre-check.
I present only pre-cleared or things I'm very confident it will work out to my management. Yes,
which I think is very, based on my experience, I think that's a very, very good advice, because I have not always seen that. I think it's like a very good, good housekeeping tip. And it's like, avoid like presenting something that is going to be like super up steep. And it's true, like me working on many different brands, it's like sometimes we put things and that health, safety is probably a good thing.
Yeah. Even in like film and TV, I feel like it happens a lot where the editor actually has so much power, because they're just editing a TV show really quickly and they're putting in a placeholder, and then the director falls in love with the placeholder. I've had it happen with songs on my roster, and it's honestly incredible when it happens. But it can also be to their detriment sometimes.
And some of this sounds bizarre, I think, because there's so many artists that exist that are just like, I want this sync, I want this look, I want to be in this TV show. So for us to say, oh, some of our artists don't like it, it just sounds incredible. But to your point, we have to respect the songs. Songs often were not written for a commercial or for a TV show. They were written to tell a story that means something to that artist. So we do have to respect that.
I would like to touch on one thing that Katie mentioned, which is song value. Okay, I think it's quite interesting, because at least when we talk a lot, it's what is the value for the client of the song? Okay, because you're putting something out, you're in many cases associating yourself with someone that beyond having a beautiful piece of music created, they also have an image. Sometimes you leverage the image, you associate yourself with the person. No, some people bring music to the table. Some people bring personality to the table. No, there's like an elevation or association, however. And there's, and Katie mentioned the concept of song value. What is song value from, there's the client perspective, or there is song value from the label perspective, and, which I think...
Well, there's market value, which is quite simply how many deals have we done that are similar, similar media, similar scope, similar level of an artist. That's a market value, and that to a degree is quite tangible. You can sort of say, well, it compares to this or this. Mm-hmm. But then there's the value that song holds to an artist and their team. Could be totally irrelevant to market. It could be that this is the song that I really care about on the album. This is a song that's written for my mum who's passed away, something like that. In which case, are we going to be able to ever move that artist by saying, but this is a market value deal? Probably not.
Okay.
And then there's the value, I guess, to a buyer that's, again, different. How important is it to you?
There is as many values as there are projects, because it's I don't think, and that's also the good thing about this industry, is that it's the meeting point of a moment, two different person, a type of brand, a type of artist, and that of course a song can be valued 1 to 10, 1 to 100, and they wouldn't be weird, because it's really, as you said, maybe the brands really wants that song and willing to pay more than they would usually. Maybe they want to pay less. Maybe the artist wants to be part of it. Maybe just two people in a good mood and wanting to make a deal at some point, and it gets easier. There is so many going on. So of course, if brands have very strong race that they don't want to depart from, I don't think it's a good idea. It's better that you overpay sometimes something, but from your own perspective. I'm not saying objectively, just from your own perspective, and sometimes underpay some other, and will balance. But because you cannot expect to have this Excel sheet, this artist with this type of campaign equal that amount. That'd be too easy. But then, end of the day, yes. As you said, because of experience and previous deal, there's some emerging some kind of rates that are relevant, could be relevant.
I think there's reflecting on the value, also how a campaign or a sync can evolve or give rebirth to a song,
Totally.
And we have seen this on so many social media platforms, songs from Fleetwood Mac that went viral on TikTok, or from Kate Bush or things like that. That suddenly, the sync also can bring a new dimension and can bring a new audience to the song, to the artist, that maybe they didn't even know from 40 years ago.
Totally.
So there's the evolution of this concept, the value of the song is not a static element. It's something that fluctuates over time and brings to new people, and it's wonderful when you see something from 40 years ago, that they don't know the history of the artist, but they love the creativity of the piece, and suddenly it's brought to new life by that. I wanted to ask you one thing, talking about value and the economics, and and I'm putting on my client hat. Sometimes we're sitting, and we're brainstorming about something, and there's the music idea comes, and then the client says no, that's going to be too expensive. That we can't afford it. And I've seen many times ideas that never fly and maybe could have come to fruition, because the whole pricing part and how does this happen and how to approach this, when you are on the client side, at least in our case, and maybe I guess for a lot of people that don't have a proper structure, because I think the bigger houses, companies of any nature, they have a professional process, and they have people like Vincent, like any other house, or the labels. But from the client part, so many times we think about, this song from this artist, and say, no, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's going to cost millions, impossible. But then, we have seen, and Fred here, they has made some very good agreements for some beautiful campaigns that will come in the future. And when they told me, they got that artist, and it's really, wow,
It's a huge. I mean, it's a huge challenge.
How the whole pricing and things, how to make this so great ideas don't get rejected. How basically the idea is how to avoid great ideas don't get rejected.
I mean, I think it's always worth asking. Number one, you never know. You never know. And I think, on my side, I think it's been really interesting. For example, we just did this big PG Tips campaign with one of my bands, Ezra Collective.
Yeah.
They did the music for it. And the reason they got involved was because of Steve McQueen. He was the director. That's the reason they did it. And I'm not going to say the fees, but it's that was a huge part of the negotiation, was that they wanted to be involved with Steve McQueen. And then it just evolved into this beautiful project, and everyone was so happy with the end result. But it really was that, more so than money, more so than anything else. So I think there's a lot of times different things. There's been another one where I did this Versace campaign, and the band was just so stoked to be a part of it. Killian Murphy asked for the band specifically. So I think there's a lot of outside factors, particularly with brands, and actually even with films and with TV. It's when I first start working with an artist, we get a list from them. We ask them to give them all their favorite directors, all the games they play, all TV shows they actually watch, and we reach out to those directors, and we kind of were hey, they're actually a fan. And I think one, that's a really nice starting point where it feels a little more organic and exciting to be working together, and two, it just means that it makes for a little bit of a different negotiation. It's like not hard and fast just on the price.
But we are behind as an industry, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's okay for someone to sit at home and say, I can't afford the Lamborghini, because they can go online and they can Google how much a Lamborghini is. That doesn't happen in the music world. And, you know, we deal in, between the major labels, millions of assets where there's no real clue online. I mean, you could probably ask ChatGPT and it might give you some sort of nonsense. But we do have to fix that, because I don't like to hear as a major label that maybe there's a song that's appeared in a chat and there's been no approach made because you believe it can't be affordable. So that, you know, this is the tide of change that is coming into our industry. Over time, I think we'll get to a point where perhaps in those meetings you'll be able to go online and get a brief idea of where this is going.
Which, you know, takes me to another, you know, what you're saying, is, you know, how do you think the process could be better, or where do you think things are going to, you know, towards what are we moving? Because, you know, still, you know, for those who enjoy the luxury of having a proper professional department dealing with music, there's like a process and they enjoy this. But, you know, the majority of people use music, and actually everyone uses music. At the end, you know, the scope, the market size is huge, you know, from small corporations to big corporations. And for everyone, it's very important. You know, it's a very important thing of what they want to convey. How do you see the future? Like, do you see things happening, or any recommendations that you say, wow, I would love to have this, you know, or it will be beneficial from the client perspective to have this, you know, approach, or also from the labels? How do you...
In terms of tools, I don't know, because we're the structure itself of the music licensing is complex, and I'm lucky to be in a company where my job exists, and there's not that many clients that have an internal music supervisor. So I'm here to educate my colleagues and everyone on how it works, what could be done, what we should avoid to. Also because we all have a very strong reputation and we don't want to do mistakes. So, but I'm the lucky one. A lot of companies, they don't have that. For them, it might be even more complex. They need to understand how it works, find the proper contacts, find the proper language. So I'm sure there new tools could be made, or tools, tutorials, I'm not even sure exactly, but some new way of working could be help. And then again, even for people like me or professional like Fred and Katie, like there might be also, we find our own way to make our life easier and our choices more relevant, but it's still very limited. I don't have time to contact 75 rights owners for one small digital campaign. So end of the day, yes, and that would have to come from the majors, because they can maybe break a little bit their system and streamline a little bit more, and we can find more clever way to reach the right person at the right time. So there is, as you said, so many arts over there. So it's going to be a complex thing, whatever we do. It cannot be simple. It's not like one phone call, but there's,
because if I think how we listen to music, okay, it has changed dramatically. Okay, you know, we have streaming platforms, and you know, I'm sure like a lot of people here still hopefully fight for analog. Still, you know, there's a lot of, you know, music, and that has totally changed our mind. When you do music research, you know, the fact that you have streaming platforms really changed your mind. You can look for 10 ideas. You know, it's not like, okay, I'm going to spin the vinyl, I'm going to see when I'm going to find the track. It's, you know, pretty lengthy process. But it's true that when it comes to, you know, what's available and how to make the process more efficient, it seems still very much run by humans. I don't mean to say that, you know, technology has to take over humans, but it could be an aid to how things could be done better. Because going to what, you know, what you were all saying, there are projects that are huge, where you can devote a lot of time, and some other projects are smaller. And I think today houses, all companies, we produce a tremendous amount of visual content. I mean, we produce thousands of assets per year, no? So how this, you know, could improve, okay, there's the big theme, and then there's the more like I don't mean to say operational, but a smaller scale that could benefit from, you know.
I think we're talking about consumption ultimately,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
as a major record label, we deal in artistry and culture, and then we look at how we can have that consumed in as many places as possible. And obviously, the advent of streaming and Spotify and YouTube and digital platforms enabled us to get our music out as quickly as possible to as many places as possible. Where sync hasn't perhaps caught up is there is a consumption piece there now, because to your point, there is so much content being created, but the procedure to clear a song is so slow. It's really difficult to change that, right? Everyone has to agree. Like, we have to agree, Sony have to agree, Universal have to agree, BMG has to agree, Cobalt has to agree. Everyone has to agree, and then artists have to agree. But what I would say, the positive sort of spin on this is, from my position, I'm talking to more and more artists now. So traditionally, I would talk to brands and buyers and supervisors who would say, guys, sort yourself out. We want to buy music quicker. You're too slow. You're too expensive. We're like, okay, well, it is what it is. Now, we've also got the artists talking to us and saying, guys, we want our music used here and here and here. Why can't you do that for us? Perhaps it's a bit more strategic for them. They want it at a certain time, not all the time. They might change their mind, but they are conscious of this opportunity. And that is the positive spin, because I think maybe what's held us back before is we need to make sure we are doing what our artists want to do first and foremost. And now our artists want to do that. It means things can change much quicker.
One question, are artists more open to sync now than they used to be in the past?
I would say definitely.
Yeah.
100%. Like, even from 10 years ago when I was working, like, stuff that has been turned down that I know now would have been approved. It's just so different. I mean, I think the idea of, like, selling out for an ad just feels completely different than it did 10 or 20 years ago. So yeah, I feel like if it's not a brand that feels offensive to one of my artists, and if the money and terms are right, like, it's rare we turn something down these days, I would say. Certain artists on my label, I work with Fella, so that's like a whole estate, which is a completely different thing, but I think artists are excited. They want to get their music out there. It's like there's so much out there that anything they can do to cut through the noise is so helpful and so incredible. And, like, as a label, every time we have a big sync, we kind of, like, check the Shazams, we check the streams, and you see it. You see a huge uptick. It really makes a difference. And I think it's just a really exciting way to get music out there also. So it doesn't feel like a negative thing anymore.
So the sync actually can bring, you know,
totally,
more listens, more plays for the song, beyond the environment of of the sync itself, can really increase your audience.
Yeah, like, you'll see, like, YouTube comments just being like, this show brought me here or whatever. Like, we see it so much of that. So I think artists are usually excited, and, like, seeing, like, I feel like their moms will text them if they're in a show or whatever. So it's a cool thing. Yeah.
So this is maybe more for on the major. So do you foresee, like, in the future, something like where people can say, and this is what's available, and imagine, I don't know, maybe this is a crazy idea or even a bad idea, like, I'm looking for 1970s whatever Afrobeat, this for this vibe, because I think also what happens is in these smaller pieces, beyond the sync part and the monetary part is the consistency part. It ends up being very random sometimes, and I think houses don't always need to have a super consistent musical identity. They can be diverse, but one thing is being diverse, another thing is being chaotic. And I think while there's a very strong discipline in terms of visual identity, the visual brands usually are pretty severe about their visual identity and their codes and with whom they work and so on. With the musical identity, probably there's also opportunity for improvement there if the search process was a little bit more organized and less, because also what happens, on my feeling, is that sometimes the visual identity is always, in many cases, centralized on one person or a few people, and the visual identity gets a very, let's say, thorough validation process. Meanwhile, the musical identity, in many cases, on the big pieces, of course, it gets a thorough validation process, but on the smaller pieces, less. So this means, I don't know if you feel.
I think there's a platform play, and I think imagine a booking.com for music for sync. You've still got your hugely expensive hotels that you pay for because you want the luxury or you want the whatever you're after. but you've also got a level where you can look at a spectrum of a choice.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's great for us as a major rights holder, because we have a huge catalogue of which we're not always able to tap into some of those recordings. And I think those artists that aren't tapped currently into would love this.
Yeah.
I think it's a great opportunity for independent artists as well. I think it's an opportunity for anyone who makes good music, because if you can establish this as a place where people go, then you know you need that spectrum, and that means opportunity for anyone making great music.
I don't know if you know, I was asking you things, or there's something that you would like to point. I think this is important. This hasn't been covered. Vincent.
I don't know. I'm happy
Katie.
when I
Yeah.
can make the artist mom happy.
Yeah.
So that's one of my goals. No, honestly, again, to go back to, of course, I'm pretty much lucky. I get turned out sometimes. Artists they don't want to work with Louis Vuitton for whatever reason. But I think I have a good rate of success when I approach people, when we find the right terms. But again, it's always, sometimes it can be a little bit cold. And I'm happy when I talk to the artist or the independent label manager in a more human way, and I see more impact. I'm not, like Adi, I'm not chasing the impact on each of my project, but when I get good feedback from the artist and they're happy about it, there is something which makes my job more relevant. And I have to admit that sometimes it's a little bit of a machine, and so it's always good when you can find that human part to it in your relationship. So it could be because I'm getting along with Tim, and it's okay, good to make a deal, and it's always good when I can go once or two steps further and maybe have a feedback from the artist itself or its mom.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredible because
Okay, so we'll get an ad and then.
I know a few moms of artists.
Yeah.
some moms of artists are very involved. Yeah, it's true.
I think you've clarified something very important there, though, that even if we transform our business, which we feel that we can, it has to hinge upon human connection. The platforms and tools can really help us, and it can accelerate conversations. It can make sure we're not left out in that boardroom that when there isn't a conversation. But yeah, I come back to the same thing. I keep saying we deal in artists and culture. It's a conversation. It's a story.
Yeah.
We need to tell that story to you as much as we enable these platforms to exist.
And even if we were to be helped by AI, there is only so much your brain can take in terms of music. I mean, it's my life since I'm 17. I always worked in music one way or another, but of course I won't know everything. And even if AI can show me everything, I can cope. So I have to agree with the human part.
Yeah.
But it's a good
The
limitation.
curator part, no? You have to be a good music curator.
Yeah.
But that's a limitation, and you have to accept it and embrace that. Okay, I know only what I know, but I know enough to make relevant decision, and I think I can understand my counterparts' needs or dreams or anything with what I have. I don't need everything. That being said, then within this, maybe we can improve the tools to make it faster, make it simpler, less frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's just so many more opportunities that, again, as one person, I'm only able to do X amount in a day. So I think if I'm able to have like AI or whatever kind of augment that, and it's now double, like great, you know. But I don't think it's going to completely eliminate our jobs, hopefully.
I think what's very interesting when I listen to you is that the whole process is still very human and very emotional, from the selection of how something gets into in a creative input, to the next step, which is how do I deal with this, to the next step is how do I negotiate this, how do I take into consideration the artist, the economic part, but also the emotional part, and that's and that how important having the right contacts and the right human approach to this is probably the most of the best way to make a successful project for everyone. No? And the fact that it's still, even though it's, tech can help us, it's still a very emotional thing, from why that thing was created, how that impacts someone, and then why you're able to make a deal because maybe the person trusts you. There's a comment of trust, because
Definitely.
there's a trust, and trust me, I'm gonna be, I'm not gonna get you in a bad situation. So,
Super important.
And the
Like,
communication's so important. Like,
Yeah.
I think it just makes so much of a smoother deal if, like, there's just, like, a really open, easy way of communicating
Right.
and not, like, roadblocks at every step. I think all the deals that we've done really successfully are just ones where it's, like, me and the supervisor just
Yeah.
constantly having this, like, open dialogue.
So the shows, I think, is quite, never thought about it, but it's true that, very, very good tip. And also, I'll note that one is like, when you present something, please do a pre-check. That's feasible. So you're gonna avoid yourself a lot of headaches. It may take a little bit more pre-work, but you're gonna save a lot of work later. I don't know, if you want to mention anything else that you think is important for, the opportunities in sync and the future, or how do you see the industry?
Yeah.
Again, be emotional,
Be emo-
but
Yeah.
don't take things personally though,
Ah.
because you have also you're gonna be frustrated. Like, so many occasions, I suggested something that I thought was great, was like way better than we end up doing, and when I started at doing this at Vuitton like 5-6 years ago, I took things very personally, and I was really mad that we were not picking my choices, and that cannot work. You also need to be like, take a step back and be like, okay, there are plenty of other opportunities. So
Yeah.
yes, emotional, but with
Yeah, and I think,
boundaries.
totally what you're saying, Masan, is what Tim said before. It's like, okay, it's about you're dealing with people, you have to be diplomat, you have to be negotiating, you have to keep a cool head, you have to be, supportive of the idea, but you cannot take it as a personal thing, and sometimes you need to deal with, sometimes a no is a no, and you
And
gotta,
be open-minded to all opportunities.
yeah.
And be collaborative, because again, even if we have great tech, we still have to collaborate as an industry with everyone. So be good partners.
Oh, great. I don't know, if anyone would like to ask a question, or if questions are allowed, or how does this, work from now on?
Not allowed.
Yeah, sure.
Question are not allowed.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, questions
Sure,
are
sure.
definitely allowed.
Ah,
Not only
okay.
allowed, but encouraged. So, what's the first question?
Over
Here,
there.
Jill.
That's a simple one, for me at least, but Louis Vuitton, you have an amazing roster of people related to music in a very direct way, though you are in fashion. How much these facilitate the work in connecting with other artists or other musicians? You had Virgil and now you have Pharrell, and how much of this influence and heavy weights makes the job easier in sync?
It's a great question. It both helps, and it's sometimes could be an issue. It's great because it helped build the fact that we are a cultural brand, and it's relevant to work with us because we did so much in the past. So that helps convince other people to work with us. Then, as for both Virgil and Pharrell, they brought a lot on the table in terms of connection, ideas, everything. So it made some things easier, but sometimes they have those two. They're like really creative genius. They have so many ideas every second. I used to receive WhatsApp from Virgil like 10 in 15 minutes with 8 ideas in those 10 texts. So, and sometimes it's counterproductive from my operational standpoint. Not that I don't I appreciate this, but my job will also be to, redirect this but the good part, they're not like divas. They're not like, if I'm saying, okay, I don't think this is going to be possible, they're like, instead of being mad, they come up with another idea, maybe even more complex than the one I just turned out. But that's a good thing. But okay, we're in a pro context here, so my operational standpoint is here that sometimes artists doing deals on their own on the side and expect it to work for such a big company as ours is difficult because there is so many other factors in play. So it helps, but in a way it could also be an issue because it can create frustration. I'd rather have that than working in a banking where there's absolutely no connection in the banking industry or whatever. So no, I'm not complaining. It's an interesting context for me. Yeah.
More questions from the audience? Come on.
No?
No more questions? All right, well, then, Javier, Tim, Vincent, Katie, thank you
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.